and welcome to the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. It is Monster Kid Radio, and I am your writer, host, and producer, Derek M. Cook. Welcome to the show, and welcome to the show, the Surfragettes. That's the music we're playing this week, courtesy of High Tide Recordings. The Surfragettes is a surf band based out of Toronto, Ontario. I really like them, and I've been wanting to play them on the show for a very long time. This is their brand new Halloween single, Banshee Bop. You can pick it up for $2 for yourself over at thesurfragettes.bandcamp.com, or follow the link in the show notes when you're done listening to this episode of Monster Kid Radio, of course. Whenever you do check them out, they'll let them know that you heard about them here on Monster Kid Radio. And what's happening this week on Monster Kid Radio? More of what you love, and by that I mean more Beta Capsule review from Mark Matzke. Still enjoying Ultra 7. I know I say I'll never do 7. I know I say I'll never do that again, but I can't help it. It's just one of those things. Plus, Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. He's all Halloween-y this time around. Well, as we all should be. It's October. It's the most magical time of the year, darn it. So yeah, let's get into the Halloween spirit. And one thing that puts me into the Halloween spirit is the HP Lovecraft Film Festival and Cthulhu Con. So, I have a long history with the Lovecraft Film Festival in that when I first moved to the Portland, Oregon area, I didn't go the first year that I was here. I didn't really know too much about it. I was still kind of finding my footing in town, that sort of thing. But the following year I went, and I had a grand old time. I had a blast. And until the pandemic, I went every single year. Whether it was in October or they did it earlier in the year when they were kind of transitioning between directors and all that, I went all the time. I loved it. And over the course of my time going to the Lovecraft Film Festival, my, I don't know if you'd call it status, but whatever you call what I do, who I am, changed in that I started as a fan, then a filmmaker, then a writer, then it's just a podcaster guy, and now I don't even really know where I'm at anymore. I'm on a weird journey, which you can follow over on my YouTube channel, Monster Kid Writer. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes, or just look up Monster Kid Writer on YouTube. Anyway, I'm on a weird journey, still trying to figure out a few things, and the Lovecraft thing has always been a constant. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, they didn't do it live. They had some online stuff, and then last year they did a limited version of the Lovecraft Film Festival that I didn't go to. I couldn't afford it. There are just a lot of other things going on in my life. I didn't go. And I had forgotten how much I missed it. Now, this time around, because I'm working 2 jobs this October, I was not able to go to everything that I wanted to go to, which is probably for the best, While it was still a mask-required event and that sort of thing, I still worry about being out in public and that sort of thing, especially up here where there do seem to be little mini outbreaks and unconfirmed spreader events happening off and on. Anyway, I didn't go to the whole thing. In fact, I only sat through 1.5 shorts blocks. The shorts blocks are the collection of short films they show, and they had 6 of them, which is insane. I saw some feature films, and they were feature films that I had seen before, but they were showing Reanimator, Bride of Reanimator, and Night of the Comet in 35mm, and Jeffrey Combs and Kelly Maroney were there. So, I did sit through those and enjoyed myself for the most part. And then I only did 1 panel. I was supposed to do 2. I was supposed to be a guest on a Cthulhu in Comics panel, which would have been a lot of fun, moderated by my friend and friend of the show, David Heath, man. And, it just would have been a blast to do that. Unfortunately, I had a job interview pop up, and I had to go do that instead. So I only did the 1 panel. Fortunately, it was the panel that I was moderating, Lovecraft's favorite films. Now, I've not listened to the audio of this. It was kind of done old school for the Lovecraft Film Festival in that we did not take over the senior center across the street. Pandemic, endemic, and all that, and I totally get it. In years past, we've taken over the senior center across the street from the Hollywood Theater, rechristened it the Esoteric Order of Dagon for the weekend, and that's where all the panels were held. And they had always done a really good job about making sure that place was mic'd up really well. They had audio, they had all sorts of stuff set up, and in years past I've even been able to hook my recorder directly into the mixing board so that the audio quality was spot on. This time around it was, let's just put a bunch of people up on stage sitting in folding chairs and give them some handheld microphones. Well, as people get talking, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it myself, you get excited and you forget that you've got a microphone that you need to hold in front of your face. We weren't sitting at a table with microphones on stands or whatever, so yeah, the audio quality is probably a little bit more old school than I've done in the past when covering Lovecraft events. However, I think the content was fun. The conversation was fun. I had a good time chatting with my fellow panelists, who included Chris McMillan from the Shadow over Portland, Andrew Migliore, the founder of the Lovecraft Film Festival, Ken Hite, who's been on the show before, author and game designer, Scott Glancy, who is also a game designer and I've never had on the show proper. In fact, I haven't had Andrew on the show proper either, which is something we're going to correct in the near future. I'll talk about that at the end. Anyway, it was the four of us. Okay, that's four panelists. Okay, 4 plus me as the moderator. And it was a blast. I had a really good time, and I hope you enjoy it too. The crowd for the Lovecraft Film Festival is not the same as the crowd for Monster Kid Radio. There's a lot of overlap, but I try to keep Monster Kid Radio pretty family friendly. I don't like having to click the explicit tag. I think I have to hit the explicit tag this time around. Just as a heads up, some of the conversation got a little fast and loose. Just saying. And consider yourself forewarned if that's a problem. Anyway, I know I've given you a lot of preamble here. Why don't we go ahead and get into the show? Let's go to Mark, let's go to Kenny, and let's go to Lovecraft right after this.
Ichiro's legs flew into the air. His tiger-striped board sailed over his head, and a wall of blue water crashed down on him, trying to crush the air out of his lungs. For a moment, he found himself head down in the water column, with a surge of the wave pushing him toward the azure depths below. Somehow, he managed to hold on to the GoPro during the wipeout, but now the camera clenched in his fist kept him from easily righting himself. As he writhed in the deep, a dark shape loomed up out of the blue.
In Monster Shark on a Nude Beach, a shy marine biologist must up his game and stop a series of shark attacks at the Caribbean's most famous clothing-optional playground. Award-winning author Stephen D. Sullivan brings you this sexy, action-packed summer read, perfect for fans of The Meg and Jaws. Read 3 chapters free on Amazon. Find out more at buffbeach.com or sdsullivan.com.
Opens its horror vault to release 3 macabre masterpieces. Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula, Lord High Priest of the living dead, begins a legend of fear as he claims the soul of his first victim with the mark of the vampire. Boris Karloff as the evil Fu Manchu, his passion for power twisting his brilliant mind as he revels in the horrors of human sacrifice and torture. Behind the mask of Fu Manchu. Frederick March as the futuristic experimenter Dr. Jekyll, using chemistry to expand his mind, delving into the taboos of the unnatural, to free the primitive, savage, murderer, Mr. Hyde, in the screen's first classic portrayal of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Bela Lugosi, Mark of the Vampire. Boris Karloff, The Mask of Fu Manchu. Frederick March. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Torture, terror, taboo. Together in a triple trip to the time when terror began. Now from MGM. Three immortal horrors, never seen on the little screen.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. The courageous battle at the heart of Ultra 7, Episode 38, is one being fought on many fronts. The Ultra Guard is summoned when cars begin disappearing from roadways enveloped in an unusual fog. Meanwhile, Dan attempts to encourage a boy named Osamu, who is in need of delicate heart surgery. A Swiss doctor is being flown into Japan specifically for the procedure, but Osamu refuses to consent to the operation unless Dan is present, so Dan agrees. Ann Yuri and Osamu's sister pick up the doctor at the airport to accompany him to the hospital, but are alarmed when fog starts to enshroud the highway. The Ultra Guard arrives to provide air support, and dispersing the fog, they witness a giant robot picking automobiles off the expressway and effectively swallowing them. They can only watch in horror as the robot snatches the car holding Anne and the doctor. That is, until Dan's aircraft crash lands, giving him the opportunity to become Ultra 7 and save the day. However, when the Ultra Guard regroups and hatches an ingenious plan to destroy the robot, it becomes increasingly doubtful that Dan will be able to fulfill his promise to Osamu, especially when the robotic menace withstands their bombing operation and cuts a path toward the city hospital. The courageous battle is tremendously satisfying, weaving together two compelling storylines that feature a wealth of imaginative special effects. The human drama of Osamu's battle against fear and Dan's heroic efforts to assist the young man make this an especially heartfelt episode, harkening back to the original Ultraman series in tone and spirit. Of course, the appearance of alien Banda's car-consuming robot Crazygon is a welcome development, as are not one but two sequences in which Ultra 7 takes action, in one case on an inventively miniature level. The icing on the cake consists of a few subtle touches that remind the viewer that Anne possesses authentic feelings for Dan that she never articulates directly, though they seem somewhat obvious to the rest of the team. These details, though fleeting, add up over the course of 49 episodes to create characters worth caring about, giving a needed bit of realism to the often outlandish proceedings. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Explore the possibility of the impossible.
Centronics International presents a terrifying journey into the supernatural, narrated by the master of slithering evil, Rod Serling.
It is tradition that ghosts and ghouls and various other citizens of the grotesque wrap themselves in malevolent mists and deep darkness, disguised as all manner of things. This is a terrifying encounter with the unknown. A tale spun by devils. Encounter with the unknown.
It's his night to howl. Dracula's dog, the meanest vampire of them all, has a four-legged friend and he's out for blood. Crown International Pictures presents Dracula's dog. Whoops, there he goes again. There's more to the legend than meets the throat in Dracula's Dog. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
20th Century Fox invites you to join the boys and girls of Sigma Phi for their annual New Year's Eve party. This year it's a masquerade on wheels, and the person behind you could be your best friend or the last person you see on Earth. Experience the most terrifying ride of your life on the Terror Train, rated R.
Starts October 3rd at a selected theater near you.
The one, the only, the classic Halloween.
I think he'll come back.
Halloween, the night he came home. Rated R.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. Today we are going to continue our celebration of Halloween with a look at the second part of a trilogy that takes place during this fall holiday. The first part escaped FM's attention, but they jumped on the bandwagon for part 2. It appeared in the same issue we saw last week, FM 179 from 1981. The article was 5 pages long with 7 photos. Let's hear what it had to say. Jack-o'-lantern or Jack the Ripper? All Hallows Eve 1978. From the screen we hear a haunting voice. Black cats and goblins and broomsticks and ghosts, covens of witches that bother their hosts. You may think they scare me. You're probably right. Black cats and goblins on Halloween night. Trick or treat! As the excited voices of shrill laughter of prankish children echo through the darkened streets and byways of the sleepy town of Haydenfield, a hideous slaughter is taking place. The malicious murder of his own sister by 6-year-old Michael Myers. For 15 years, Michael is confined in the Warren County Mental Health Hospital. And then, at 21, on Halloween night, he escapes and goes home. That was a heart-stopping scenario for Halloween, the most successful independent production of all time. It was a low-budget, high-quality film which brought 3 relative unknowns to the forefront of their crafts. Actress Jamie Lee Curtis, The Fog, Prom Night, Terror Train, Road Games, and co-producers John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. The Fog, Escape from New York. Once again, this terrific trio has teamed up, or conspired, truth to tell, and on October 31st will confront squirming audiences all over the country with Halloween 2, perhaps the most anxiously awaited sequel since The Empire Strikes Back. As a sequel, Halloween 2 employs a unique concept, seldom utilized since The Bride of Frankenstein in 1935. It begins at the very moment the original concluded. Co-producer-writer Deborah Hill explained the unusual format while at a sound session in Hollywood. What we've done is overlap the ending of Halloween with the beginning of the sequel. Halloween 2 opens with Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, telling the children she's been babysitting to run down the street and get help. Then, if you remember, the shape sits up in the background and attacks again, just as Dr. Loomis, Donald Pleasance, burst into the scene. He shoots the shape 6 times, knocked him off the balcony and onto the ground below, only to later find out that the shape has disappeared. This is the point where the storyline of Halloween 2 begins. The article continues with a synopsis of the film. In the middle of the story, we find these interesting facts. The special effects for Halloween 2 are greatly enhanced by the use of Dolby Sound, a technique not used in the original. This improvement, combined with the extraordinary color quality achieved in the outdoor night scenes, make Halloween 2 a technically superior film. The synopsis continues but stops short of spoiling the ending. The article concludes like this. Dr. Loomis has made a startling discovery, which climaxes in the film's trick ending. It really is a treat. What is it, you ask? You can find out on October 31st, Halloween night, the night he comes home, and the night Halloween 2 opens nationwide. In addition to Halloween 2, horror film aficionados will be treated to an October 31st network telecast of the original Halloween, which will include new scenes filmed by John Carpenter, especially for Terrorvision. That is all for this week's spooky look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next week. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
Something is moving in the fog.
Who's there?
Something not quite human.
Who is that?
In Halloween, John Carpenter created a night of absolute fear. Now, he has conjured an evil so intense, not even the dawn can drive it away. The Fog, a study in unrelenting terror. Rated R.
These are the girls of Hamilton High. Tonight they'll be more beautiful than ever before in their lives. Because tonight is prom night. And someone will come to the prom alone, just to watch them dance, to see them fall in love, to see them die. Prom night. If you're not back by midnight, you won't be coming home. Rated R.
We are ready? Let's give it up to our tech people, our director and everything. How awesome is that?
Thank you, tech people.
All right. So we are here for a panel called Lovecraft's Favorite Films. And before we get into everything, I just want to kind of go down the list, let people introduce themselves here. I am the moderator, Derek M. Cook, and I am a multi-award-winning, long-running podcaster here in town. I produce the Monster Kid Radio podcast. Been podcasting for over a decade, and I love film, and specifically I love classic film. So yeah, this was something I thought would be fun to chat with some other fellow film and Lovecraft fans. Sir.
Okay, my name is Scott Glancy. I am a writer who has produced a small amount of role-playing game material related to Call of Cthulhu, and I am just a film fan and a film buff. So the diving into the 30s movies that, and for that matter, 1916 movies, the 20s and 30s films that Mr. Lovecraft enjoyed, I'm 100% in for that. Especially in its pre-Hays Code. Sadly, there's not enough of that in his list of films that he enjoyed, but we'll make do.
How odd.
Yeah.
Asexual weirdo, not a Myrna Loy fan.
Yeah. Well, that's one of many strikes against him, let's be honest.
Right below the anti-Semitism, right above the eating stale beans, right in that sweet middle spot. I'm Kenneth Hite. I'm a writer and game designer. I have a podcast with Robin Laws called Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff. And from that podcast has sprung Frankenstein-like a audiobook of our horror essentials. So we have a horror cinema essentials audiobook on Bandcamp right now. So go ahead and download 5.5 hours of Robin and I covering 135 films from Caligari to Annihilation.
What is that under on Bandcamp? How do people find it?
Ken and Robin's Bandcamp / Ken and Robin, I believe.
All right,
or
cool,
Bandcamp.com.
Check it out.
Search Ken and Robin on Bandcamp, you'll find it.
Okay. I'm Andrew Migliore. I founded the HP Lovecraft Film Festival. I also wrote a book called The Lurker in the Lobby.
That's right, I published that.
What was that? I know, it was Pagan Publishing back in 19...
The day.
Actually, remind me and I'll send you a link. Okay.
So that's it.
I'm Chris McMillan. I'm the writer and publisher of The Shadow Over Portland, where I do movie reviews, opinion pieces, and most importantly, list all the horror, sci-fi, and fantasy events happening in the Pacific Northwest, at least the ones I can find. The site right now has a Halloween 2022 page, so you can go there and check out all the haunted houses across the Pacific Northwest that I have found so far, or will be added. And you'll find it all at shadowoverportland.blogspot.com.
Excellent.
Right on. So I took some of the information that we're going to talk about here from some various websites and such, and I did find a website that listed 10 different movie theaters that were in the Providence area, probably around the time Lovecraft was doing his thing. And I was kind of shocked, actually, that there were 10 movie theaters in Providence, because Rhode Island's a small area. But the theaters were called the Majestic, the Strand, the Emery, the Victory, the RKO Albee, Phase, the Capitol, the Modern, the Uptown Theater, and the Bijou Theater, which later became known as the Empire. This would have been around the time Lovecraft was walking around and doing his thing in Providence. And at one point, he actually worked as a ticket taker at one of these theaters. I have not been able to find out which one. Do any of you know?
What were the years?
I mean, David Hayden's...
1929 to 1930.
It was actually probably just early 30.
Yeah.
This is based on Harry Probst, who was a friend and correspondent of Lovecraft, and another one of Lovecraft's acquaintances saw him walking to the theater and said, "Hey, what are you doing down here?" And he says, "I'm going to my job to take tickets to the theater." So we have, everything except Lovecraft's own letters saying that he did it, and it was probably early 1930 when the Depression was really hitting, and he needed money to go to Florida. He probably just did it as gig economy.
And those letters say that he was both usher and he was in the ticket box taking tickets.
I think that probably what happened is Probst and the other guy were guessing.
I do have a quote from Lovecraft in one of his letters in which he states, "As you surmise, I am a devotee of the motion picture, since I can attend shows at any time, whereas my ill health seldom permits me to make definite engagements or purchase real theater tickets in advance. Some modern films are really worth seeing, though when I first knew moving pictures, their only value was to destroy time." You do you, Lovecraft.
I found that quote really interesting. You sent it in the link you had with the films, because most of the films on that list started out as plays. I think there were about 4 or 5 of them did.
Well, that's kind of indicative of a lot of early Hollywood, too, is you have a number of plays and playwrights moving over to Hollywood, or plays being picked up, including some of the most important films for me as a monster kid. And this is relevant to at least one of the movies on the list here. John Balderston was a playwright who was responsible for the play version of Dracula and Frankenstein, which is what the Universal films were based on. So you have that connection there. And the movie Berkeley Square, which is based on a play by John Balderston, was one of Lovecraft's favorites. So I thought that was kind of neat to see that while Lovecraft may not have ever written specifically, nor I don't know if he ever saw any of the Universal monsters, any of the classic horror monster movies I would talk about on my podcast, but it's interesting, at least there's that fantastical connection, kind of tangentially.
We know that he did see both Dracula and Frankenstein because he slags them off in his letters.
And The Invisible Man.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And he really liked The Invisible Man.
Good.
He actually thought it was fairly creepy here.
That's great.
Well, he was less than impressed by Wells, so I think the departure from the source material might not have bothered him as much. With that, whereas when he reviews Frankenstein, he says something like, "My chivalric appreciation for Mrs. Shelley, caused me to see red throughout," or something like that.
But didn't he say in that he liked parts of it?
Yeah.
But when you compare it to because in the supernatural horror in literature, he wrote about Frankenstein and saying what a classic horror was. So when he's comparing it against that to the film adaptation, it's going to fall short.
Sure. And he didn't have a cinematic imagination, which I think is pretty clear.
But when he writes about how things can't be described, it's not very cinematic.
He's
describe them anyway.
His part is architecture, not cinema. So
Good point.
But and there's more plays too that you were talking earlier. The Bat and Winterset we were just talking about too. So again, those were very popular plays that got converted into film.
I have to admit, of all the films on this list, this Lovecraft series films, the Winterset is the one that kind of befuddles me the most.
Me too.
As a film about a rewriting of the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, where our plucky Burgess Meredith, as a Italian immigrant, is going to clear his father, John Carradine's name. Right? Is it John? It's John. It's John Carradine's name, but they're all playing, Italian immigrants, who have been done over by the American justice system. And I'm like, wait, Lovecraft was cool with Italian immigrants? When did this happen exactly?
I had the exact same thing too, and the Italians portrayed that, of course, when he was talking to the judge, is how passionate he is. "I'm so sorry for you, Judge, because I'm innocent, and you are going to have to live for the rest of your life with the horror of knowing that you put an innocent man to death."
Judge Glancy, which I think is an awesome name for a judge who's going to absolutely kill the wrong guy.
And the whole thing with the hurdy-gurdy too, like the whole thing with them dancing under the bridge, and then you have the Irish police officer coming up. That's the same. I was like, I just fascinated that he thought that was your theory.
Well, my theory is that he liked the stage version in which the Italians are all killed.
That's true.
And we know that he disapproved of the tacked-on happy ending of the movie.
Yes, that is correct. He does say
so. He's like, the Italians escaping justice again. Darn it!
Saved by an Irishman.
Right.
I think part of the reason that he wasn't happy with the tacked-on happy ending too is because it really kind of destroys the message of the film. Because you've got Burgess Meredith as this, you've got John Carradine wronged in court. You get Burgess Meredith trying to fix it, and at the end of the show, at the end of the play, he gets plowed over by the system, represented by gangsters, about 6 feet into the ground because he's shot with his love interest. But
spoilers, by the way.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, not for the movie.
Sorry, everyone was going to rush out and see a revival of Winter set.
But the interesting, but they had to change it obviously because this was during the Hays Code, and so you couldn't have.
Well, that was one of the things.
Win.
That crime can't win.
That's it.
Injustice can't win under the Hays Code, and so they just pulled the fangs out of this.
Yeah, they really did. They really did.
Using the hurdy-gurdy.
Mm-hmm. And then having the one guy grab the cigarette and light it, signaling. Can I spoil this for you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's the head gangster was going to get away with it, but this guy lights a cigarette, which is a signal to the gangster's assassin to shoot the next person coming down, and it happens to be the gangster, the mob boss. So. Justice prevails.
It's a bit like Bogart sending the guy out the door in The Big Sleep. Next guy out the door is Nick gunned down. It's gonna be you, Johnny.
So the movie that we're talking about right now is Winter's Head. It came out in 1936, and I've got a list, and like I said, I've got a little slips of paper up here if you're interested in picking them up, just to kind of have.
Or you can go to Donovan Lux's site, hplovecraft.com,
which is exactly where I pulled it.
Has the list.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it has the 10 that.
The 10 that I sent to everybody, but that's where I pulled it. So Lovecraft.com is where you're going to want to go.
Just reading that list is not a substitute for this panel, because
No.
we've already mentioned like 3 movies that are not on.
Exactly.
Well, and on that website, there are quotes from different letters from Lovecraft talking about these films. It's not enough because he says of the movie Strange Interlude, excellent. That's it. So I don't know what he really thought, other than he thought it was excellent. It does star Clark Gable, so maybe he liked Clark. I don't know.
I've got to tell you, the thing again that strikes me about that is, does anybody know what goes on in Strange Interlude?
It's a 1932 film.
Yeah, and again, this sounds like some pre-Hays shit.
Yeah.
Having learned that her husband's family has a history of insanity in it, our wife runs out and has an affair to produce a child that won't have a history of insanity, and then doesn't tell husband Clark Gable. Okay, that's super effed up for but it's 1932, so it's cool.
But again, it's fiction that hits Lovecraft where he lives.
Yeah.
Because both of his parents died in an insane asylum. Same insane asylum, as a matter of fact, just years apart.
But looking at some of these films, I was pretty remembering all these things, like how much kissing and you think about All's Quiet on the Western Front, like how intense those films were for back then.
Oh yeah. The 1930s.
Yeah.
I think
It's still better than every version I've seen up to date. It has still been the most nasty, unpleasant.
It's long, but it's
yeah. It is still the if you want some trench warfare, start there.
Has everyone seen that? Has anyone seen it?
It's so good.
It's a
original
kick in the
one.
gut.
It's an experience.
Don't go with Henry Thomas. Or I don't know what's the new one that's just come
Yeah.
out. Is it a German production?
Oh, I don't know about the new one, but there was one with Harry Tom. John Boy, yeah.
But it's pretty intense. It's amazing where they're showing the French, raid the line, and they do this loop of machine gun fire over and over, and it's pretty intense. And then bodies, and then people pounding each other with the rifles. And this was 1930, and yet it didn't stop what was to come.
No.
Well, I mean, the one that was to come was started by someone who was in it, so I don't think a movie would have made a difference.
That's true.
And it is one that Lovecraft saw repeatedly, again, from HPLovecraft.com. I was glad to see this movie again after 4 years, and which impressed me even more favorably than in 1930. So we know he saw it more than once. For somebody who at one point thought movies were just a waste of time, that's kind of cool to know that he had his favorites. He's like, I'm going to go see that one again.
I can't help but notice that most of the films on this list are talkies, and he would have started off seeing, of course, films. I mean, he sees what something Derek was.
David Garrick from 1916.
So he's watching films during the silent era.
Absolutely.
But most of the things that he's really happy with are the ones that actually have added sound to the story.
Well, what happens there, we got a little bit of the light is better under the lamppost situation, because J. Vernon Shea only started writing to him in 1931, and J. Vernon Shea is the only one of his correspondents who actually really cared about film. So Lovecraft, by and large, was genuinely happy to talk about whatever his correspondent wanted to talk about, and they always wanted to talk about horror fiction to begin with, and often they never got off that, or they got onto, barbarism versus civilization or whatever.
Well, not everyone's Bob Howard.
Bob Howard probably had no movie theaters anywhere near him.
Cross Plains? What do you think?
I feel like that's a big no.
There's a big no.
Yeah, but Shea was a film buff, and when he and Lovecraft started corresponding, Shea was studying modernist literature, and so they were talking about things like All's Quiet on the Western Front, the novel, not necessarily the film of it, and then that brings them into film, and then they realize they have a common interest. So Lovecraft might have been gaga about the silence. He didn't write to the Galomo about it.
Well, we do know that he won $25 for The Image Maker of Thebes, right? It was a scathing review. It never got published, but he won the $25. So that, I think, gives an idea of some of the silent film contempt he might have.
True.
Well, I mean, the thing that he would always complain about is if you got a historical detail wrong. That threw him out of the film. It made him very mad, and so he has a and as a writer, I totally get it. He has a attachment to the original novel or script, whatever it is, and then feels like doing a movie version is by definition a betrayal of it.
Right.
And then he also, with historical epics, 9 times out of 10. Is just mad as a hornet that they got the architecture wrong or whatever else.
But he was quoted to say, right, that he would rather have a moderately good film versus a poorly acted drama.
Yeah.
So I think he preferred the over time.
We're talking about, you mentioned David Garrick, and that was directed by Frank Lloyd, and I found it fascinating that there are 3 Frank Lloyd films on the list. David Garrick from 1916, so I'm assuming that one's a silent.
Mm-hmm.
I did not get a chance to see that one. But Cavalcade from 1933, as well as The Berkeley Square, that I mentioned, also from 1933. And I watched both of those prior to, actually I just finished Berkeley Square this morning. And I had never watched it before, even though I'd known it loomed large in Lovecraft fandom and all that.
We showed an archival print in San Pedro.
Exactly, I'm so jealous.
I was saying that before the panel started. It's like I'd love to have seen it on the big screen.
Cavalcade starts with basically God Save the Queen. And Berkeley Square is about a guy who goes back to his English ancestors, which, big surprise, Lovecraft liked that.
Yeah, it's both Shadow Out of Time and Charles Dexter Ward all rolled into one.
Oh yeah.
Plus powdered wigs, so that's he's gonna like that.
But I appreciate.
And Leslie Howard was put on this earth to play a Lovecraftian narrator.
Oh my God! Leslie Howard's fantastic. He's one of my God. When he's in something, I'm like, I know I'm in for a good show because I do like him a lot.
But I loved in that film he talks about time and he describes it.
Berkeley Square.
Yeah, Berkeley Square. I'm sorry. He describes it with a river. The journey. Like you're in the boat, right?
Yes.
In the past is the maple trees or something, and then on the right you see fields. That's the present. And he's trying to explain it to the doctor there. And then around the bend is the future. You can't see the future. But if you're in a plane, you're above it all. And it just flashes back to with
4 dimensions.
Yeah. So
it's flatland.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating. And for that time period, I thought that was a pretty heady thing to have in a film. But
one of the things I appreciate about that film as I'm watching it, because I had no idea, I knew what the basic part of it was, but the fact that he screws up a lot. He's got the journal, he figures everything's going to be great, but just, his manner of speaking triggers a lot of people because he's using terms and
what is this cockeyed? What?
Yeah, that they're not familiar with. He's talking to people about, he's talking to someone painting his portrait about a work he just started as if it's already finished. And that was a really nice way to force him to the conclusion of the film where he has to go back because,
it's literally a movie where nitpicking the historical details is the plot.
Yes. The only thing I would have liked to have seen is I would have liked to have seen the character who was displaced into the present. That would have been interesting, because...
This river air has...
Yeah.
What's the line? This river air has caused me to grow... what do you use?
Physical.
A physical, yeah. Thank you, Chris Sarandon, for that one.
Yeah, because...
Thank you, Dan O'Bannon.
We get a little bit of a reference from one of the characters as to what was going on from the person in the past holding up in the house, because it's like, what the heck?
Yeah, what was a fucking nightmare?
Yeah.
So you remind me of the Mirror, Mirror Star Trek.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Then in Mirror, Mirror, you go back to the Enterprise and like, oh no, I saw them instantly and threw them in the brig. What's your problem?
They were obvious monsters.
It's easier to go back in time knowing what it's supposed to be like and pretend versus going to the future and like being bewildered.
What, true.
I do like that in Ruthless
Obviously,
at
this
the
one.
beginning. I do like at the beginning when he first gets back there, all of his little mistakes are just like, oh, well, it's like that in America. Like, he plays all of his faux pas as, well, I'm an American, clearly, because, yeah, I love that.
And the oldest daughter, like, had a count. She was counting all the words that he was making a mistake
Right.
and proving that he was from Satan or something.
Yeah. Possessed or something, yeah.
It suddenly occurs to me, people in the audience may not have seen Berkeley Square. Real fast.
We should talk about it.
Leslie Howard plays an American who inherits a house or buys a house on Berkeley
He
Square.
inherits it. It's found out that, like, an ancestor designed it or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
On Berkeley Square in London, goes to take possession, falls in love with the antique architecture everywhere, and says you should be able to will yourself into the past. Again, totally Lovecraftian vibe. Sure enough, he does. He wills himself into 1784.
It's like 170-something years.
And so then he's got the diary of his ancestor, and he says, well, I'm just going to do what the diary says and not screw up time. Because this is not my first rodeo, although it in fact is, because of course, when he meets the girl his ancestor is supposed to marry, he falls in love with her sister, and the whole situation blows out of proportion.
As you do.
Yeah, because one thing I did like, and I don't think, he said about the diary, but there's a scene when he first enters the room in the 1700s, he's looking in the pocket where he had the diary when he left the present time, and there's something else there. So he's kind of like, whoops, lost it. Well, I know what I'm doing.
Right.
If you think about
Didn't have pockets.
There's no pockets on these bridges.
But if you think about the case of Charles Dexter Ward, he wrote that in 27.
Yeah.
Many years before he saw Berkeley Square. And so you look at some of the elements in there, the portrait, the past coming back forward. Imagining him sitting in the theater watching this, I can just imagine like him being,
And then still not sending it in to get, I didn't know until last night, Ken's telling me, oh no, he never even bothered submitting in case of Charles Dexter Ward's on publication. And I'm like, what? Howard, what the?
That's my reaction too. Like you have the second best novel in the history of horror sitting in your desk drawer while 3 publishers say, if you had a novel, we could talk.
Berkeley Square starts with the title card, and I think this kind of sums it up. How many of us have wished that we might escape from the dull reality of the present into the glamour and romance of yesteryear?
Ding, 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 ding.
1972.
Well,
You know how when someone mentions Cthulhu on South Park and all your friends tweet you about it?
Yeah.
You can just imagine everyone Lovecraft knew sending him a letter saying, you have to see Berkeley Square.
But if we could journey back into the mystery of the past, should we find contentment or unhappiness? And that's, of course, the whole thing. And
The answer is yes.
yeah, I really adored that film. When I finished watching it this morning before coming out here, I adored it. If you haven't seen Berkeley Square, man, some enterprising pirate has put it on YouTube. Not that I encourage such things, but it's out there.
it's a good print.
It did not inspire Charles Dexter Ward being shot 5 years after it was written, but it did inspire Shadow Out of Time by making him sort of immediately, all of his desire to escape time, which has been a constant in his personal belief system forever, is reified in this film, and that makes him think, oh, I can treat this in a story. Mm-hmm. And he starts, basically, maybe not right after seeing it, but in early 1934, he's writing to, or is it late 33, that he's writing to Clark Ashton Smith saying, I've got a new story, it's Shadow Out of Time, it's about ancient Lomar, and they send people to swap your brains, and this, that, and the other, and then he decides to make it even farther past the Lomar.
Yeah, one thing that surprised me about Bartlett Square was the ending's not what you expect. I was expecting more of what happened in, I guess, the remake.
Even when he goes down into that giant ruin in Australia and sees his own diary?
That's a different film.
I think that's maybe I'm confused. Maybe I saw the director's cut.
That was the original.
But
He's trying to lure you in.
yeah, but no, it's a different ending than I expected based on the setup and the cliches around time travel and all that. Now
It's a bit stark in a way.
But are they cliches in 1930?
Well,
maybe they're setting up the trope. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but it was just nice to have the ending not be what I expected.
Well, they do use Judeo-Christianity as the means for them to have
right
in time. So basically, I don't want to say any more.
The only other thing that I'd want to say about Cavalcade, the other Frank Lloyd film, was that it starred Una O'Connor in one of the roles, and she is not shrilling her head off like she does in The Invisible Man and Bride of Frankenstein. So that was kind of refreshing. I mean, I don't mind her in those films. It was refreshing to see her not screaming all the time.
I was surprised. I'm like, is that? Oh my God! Yeah. I'm like, oh wow. It's like I didn't expect to see her in that.
Yeah, Cavalcade is sort of a generational saga about a British upper middle class family. I think so. And it begins with the beginning of the Boer War and ends in the 30s. Right.
So basically, Downton Abbey.
I don't think that they're as exalted as the Downton Abbey people.
No, they're not. They're not. But that's the same time period. Straight.
Yeah.
Now putting the upstairs downstairs kind of coat over that and shade over that is interesting. Okay.
Once again, the ending on that got a little dark.
Yeah.
Because the actors.
That's World War I.
Well, no, it was the end of World War I. Yeah. Start of the 30s.
Oddly enough, the end of the war is no
the
more
actors
dark
basically.
than the beginning. That's about oddly enough, the end of World War I is no less dark than the beginning. It's all straight all the way down.
If the ending to me, it was like the actors actually break the fourth wall. In a way, they're toasting each other, but then they turn to the camera and look and say, here's to England, may she be prosperous and find peace and all that, and then they have this montage shot of everything coming up in the 40s, and they're still just toasting, looking right at you as if, this is not going to work.
And Berkeley Square, they have that too, because she kind of sees in the future, and the horror that she sees is very H.G. Wellsian future with its trench warfare, World War I stuff, and so it all ties together.
Yeah, it's all very things to come.
Yep. It would be interesting to see what Lovecraft's response was to that if he saw it.
Things to come.
Things to come.
Oh yeah, it's one of the, it shocked me as one of the. Things that was shocked me as one of the earliest depictions of a post-apocalyptic world with who's Ralph Richardson as the boss, I guess, in their little tiny hill people versus plains people world where they've whittled England down to just bare kingdoms around the ruins of cities. I would have loved to see what he thought about that.
I believe, check me if I'm wrong, but I think he saw King Kong, right?
I don't know.
And
I don't know.
Yeah, I seem to have a vague recollection. Don't cite me, but I seem to have a vague recollection of him sort of tossing off a mention when he's talking about sort of spectacle. And I think that the special effects in Things to Come would have. I mean, he was all about the apocalypse, right? Lovecraft, and the Things to Come apocalypse would have absolutely matched his current fascist politics.
Sure.
And fascistic socialist politics, and his, he wouldn't have minded that it changed the Wells novel because again he had mixed feelings about Wells. So I feel like that's the Lovecraft movie review.
Yeah, he would have been all down.
I want to see.
He would have been all down with Raymond Massey and his gas of peace.
Yep.
That they dump all over everyone at the end of that film, or partway through it.
There's a lot we don't know because we don't have all the letters, although ST is putting the rest of those volumes together. So we don't know what he did. So King Kong, etc.
I am going to, again, I pitched this at Ken earlier this weekend. I am going to pitch the idea that Lovecraft, sometime in 1920.
I was actually going to shoot to that.
All right,
please, bring it
I'll
up.
wait off.
No, please.
Now?
Yeah.
All right. Now. There's a Okay, so we all are familiar with the story of the temple. At the beginning of the temple, you're on a German U-boat, and the commander is talking about how they're shooting propaganda film on their U-boat with the survivors of the ship that just torpedoed, where they're giving them rations for their surviving on the high seas. And then after the camera's turned off, they take the rations back and machine gun everybody in their lifeboats, and then go on being the dirty Hun, right? There is only one actual footage of documentary footage shot on a German U-boat during World War I. There's only one film that was shot during World War I, and it was shot by Lothar Arnaud de la Perrier. How's that for a German U-boat ace? Lothar is the #1 scoring guy on the planet. No one has ever sunk more ships than he did. He did it all in the Mediterranean and fired a grand total of 3 torpedoes during his career. Because apparently his unrestricted warfare was to pull beside merchant ships, say, pull over, and then we're gonna check your manifest. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to sink your ship. Please get off the boat while we open the sea cocks and the valves, and then we use scuttling charges and we send it to the bottom. That's how he ran his war, and on one of his cruises in the Mediterranean, he took a film set with him and shot this silent film that turned up in Germany in 1917, making the rounds as propaganda, called The Magic Girdle or The Magic Belt, which I don't know what that's a reference to, because I can't, that film is available on the British Imperial War Museum's website. I don't know what the German title cards say. However, the film came to the United States in 1920. Oops, the year he wrote The Temple. And in it, there's a whole new set of title cards showing a lot of the same things. They're showing the people on these various merchant ships having to paddle out in their lifeboats to the U-boat. They go through the manifest of the ship. If there's stuff that's going to be used for the war effort, the Germans sink the ship oftentimes with either scuttling charges or sometimes the deck gun. This is the only film that existed that did this in 1920. And somehow this made it into a Lovecraft story, and my money is still on that maybe Howard saw this in a theater in 1920 and thought, okay, that's a nice touch.
And the American title was?
The American title was The Log of the U-35, and you can find it on YouTube. There are multiple titles for it out there. But the one that, there's like a 26-minute cut of this film that's available, and you can find it on YouTube, The Log of the U-35. And it's actually a lot of, you will have seen this footage if you've watched a documentary about World War I, because this is the only actual combat footage that was ever shot from a U-boat in that time period. So when you're seeing ships sink stern first, on whatever documentary or whatever History Channel show, it's probably Lothar's footage. And I dearly hope that this connection is correct, but I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to tell. Was that print in Providence in 1930? 20, sorry, would have been in Providence in 1920? I don't know, but it's really creepy how, again, it's parallels right on the money.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. You sent me the link to that, and I watched it the other day, and yeah, it is. The similarities are strikingly eerie, like you said. It's right there, man.
And Lovecraft did that all the time. He lifted things from modern science, articles, news.
Sure. Now, for the podcast version of this, I'm going to make sure there's links to everything that we've talked about in the show notes at monsterkidradio.net. But I don't know how much time we have left, but why don't we...
what other films have we got?
I was going to mention one thing, just to get back to the silent.
Please.
So it was he was a big fan of Charlie Chaplin. So, right? I mean, he wrote a poem dedicated to Charlie Chaplin. Actually, we were going to put it on the dressing rooms in the green room here at the theater. It never happened, but...
Next time.
Yeah,
that's
next
cool. Time. You just asked me about some of the other movies. I think two of the ones that stood out to me, the fantastical Midsummer Night's Dream, starring James Kennedy and Nick Powell, which I think is just cool that he watched that.
And Andy Rooney.
as Puck. Yeah.
How cool is that? And then he also cited 1933's Don Quixote.
I'm sorry, Mickey Rooney as Puck. My apologies to Andy Rooney.
I didn't catch that until just now. Now I've got him in. That's bizarre.
Yeah. And Don Quixote, he thought was...
Yeah, the 1933 Don Quixote as well was something else that he had cited. He said it was a first-rate thing he'd seen, the first-rate thing he'd seen since last February. Genuine art from start to finish without a false note.
Did we mention Phantom of the Opera yet?
I have not brought it up, but
I just bring it up. Yeah, he kind of, he said he nodded in the first part of it, but then he was riveted, and no amount of opiates would have made him fall asleep. Which I thought was great.
Well then, all right, Mr. Lovecraft.
Oh, that's high praise.
What was the, I'm trying to remember the title of the Charles Lawton one. I think it was another Lloyd.
The Barretts of Wimpole Street.
Yeah, the Barretts of Wimpole Street. Yeah,
It's a historical film about Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
With major changes from the play, apparently.
Sure.
The line I came up with, was looking online, was apparently they toned down the implication that the reason that Charles Lawton won't let any of his daughters marry is because he's got an eye for them. And that was in the play, and they like, well, we're not even gonna touch that. You can't bring that up. And Lon's response was, I may not be able to say it, but they can't stop me from leering at the other actresses.
Can't stop me from acting.
Yeah. Which seemed like, again, a weird story for him to latch onto, this tyrannical father. Because he has an absent one. He has no father.
That's true.
I think it was less the love element. And when you say, we're removing the love element from the story of Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, you're removing it to what's left. What's left is the Victorian atmosphere, which he did praise. And again, in the same way that he doesn't care as much about H.G. Wells, he doesn't really care that much about the Victorian era. So the fact that they got it mostly right was good enough for him. He wouldn't have been nitpicking it as if it were a Georgian film.
Any thoughts, questions, anything like that as we start wrapping up? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you alluded to Lovecraft's questionable feelings about Wells. What was his objection to H.G. Wells?
I don't know. He just doesn't, he doesn't mention Wells an awful lot, and whenever he does, it's usually dismissive. Like he refers to War of the Worlds as a semi-classic. So it's very passive-aggressive. I think there may be some irritation that Wells is taking a great gift for, similar to his objection to Chambers, right? That he takes this great gift for horror and then turns it into preaching, in Wells' case, instead of, and of course, up until 1930, Lovecraft and Wells would have been political polar opposites. So it would have been mad as a hornet about Wells being a socialist. And then it's only much later that he swaps around. The Depression basically does that. So
it's amazing how being poor will suddenly move your politics.
Well, again, the adjective fascistic always has to stay in there.
Yeah.
So I don't know that he necessarily is contemptuous of Wells, but he's never gives him the praise that you would think the other great pioneer of cosmic horror would deserve from him.
Right.
Yeah. Another question along those lines. The movie, what was it? The Island of Lost Souls? With
Charles Lawton.
Charles Lawton again.
That's right.
Which is going to be showing here at the Hollywood Theater next weekend, just so you know.
Really?
By any chance, any comment by Lovecraft on that?
I haven't seen it. If there is one,
I'm not aware. Sorry.
We just wish.
Right?
We wish there was.
I'm sure that ST was here the other day. Hey there, are you here? No? Okay. I just wondered, because he's just finished editing even more letters, and so ask him if there's anything else that's there.
There's more stuff in the indexes.
I don't know when they're going to kick us out of here. I think there's another panel coming in at 2, I believe. So we've got about 10 minutes until then. Any other final thoughts or anything? From anybody else? Out there or up here?
So how much did it cost to go to the movies in 1930? Lovecraft have that kind of...
Ooh, that's a really good question.
It depended on what theater. The Bijou, which is the sort of place that David Hayden suspects that Lovecraft worked, you had dime seats or you had 35-cent seats. And so Lovecraft would have obviously gone to the dime seat ones. Or I strongly suspect it would have been a situation where he would go with a friend and the friend would pick up the dime, right? We've all been there. Your short payday was 3 weeks ago, but you really have to go see Spider-Man or whatever the hell.
You have beans to buy.
Yeah. So it was not particularly expensive. I mean, the price of a movie ticket has risen faster than inflation.
Oh, yes.
But it was still, a dime would have been a real cost to him.
Anybody else? Anybody up here?
On the other hand, when you went, you would see like 4 movies.
Yeah, there's that too.
I mean, you would get the A picture, the B picture, the short, and the newsreel or the cartoon.
Yeah, it was an event.
It was a good time.
Good experience. Yeah.
Certainly more affordable than today.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And the popcorn was absolutely cheap.
Yeah.
Good point.
Anybody else up here?
I guess it's hard. I've got a light right here.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I remember somewhere in Lovecraft letters he mentioned seeing Chris Long de-ballooning leads like in the early 20s. Could be incorrect about that, but beside the classic expressionist films like Algar.
I didn't hear which.
He missed that one. I think he writes somewhere he regretted not being able to see that because he's heard from all accounts that it was an amazing production, but he didn't get to see it.
I would love to know what he thought about things like Metropolis and things like that.
Or Nosferatu.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now,
But the cabinet, I think.
M, I don't know, played in America while he was alive, though.
I was about to say.
I don't think it did because of the legal battle with Stoker.
Still would have been cool to know what he thought.
Well, no, Nosferatu absolutely played in America because Americans were like, foreign copyright, go blow. we were China back then.
Well, I think what ended up happening, if I remember right, is the copies were destroyed, but there was one that was circulating around America, and it was shown for film groups, I believe.
The copies were destroyed is something that they told Mrs. Stoker's lawyers.
Yeah.
The copies were not destroyed.
Oh.
It played commercially in New York in 1930.
Oh, okay.
There are ads you can see in the New
Yeah,
York
there's no
World.
internet back there to kind of set up a Google alert and be like, hey, they're showing my movie. No.
Maybe
I mean, there was a sort of a, because they did find that really good print in Argentina, there was sort of this is the Nosferatu panel, sadly. There's sort of a self-mythologizing narrative that all the copies were gone because it's a better story if Florence Stoker destroys all the copies except one. In fact, she destroyed all the copies in Germany, which is, of course, all that mattered to her now, and most of the ones in England. But every other country, she'd have to pay other lawyers. And her lawyers didn't want to pay for it. Prana Films had no money to pay for it. So if you write to Universal or whoever had the rights to distribute, or whatever company it was, had the rights to distribute Nosferatu, and you said, destroy your copies, and they say no, Florence didn't have the money. I think the Playwrights Union that she was doing a lot of this action through didn't have the money or the interest. It just sort of, fell between the stools a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What about?
But it does make a better story if there's only one copy left.
It does.
Well, yeah.
What about Nyarlathotep? Isn't he the most original cosmic horror projectionist?
Yes, Nyarlathotep definitely is the filmiest in the sense of most about film of Lovecraft stories, and it is interesting when you talk about the notion that silent films exist to destroy time. To some extent, Nyarlathotep is doing that as well. He's collapsing
time and space.
Time from the present to the far future when Providence is under the green sky and Orientals are playing jazz on the corner and all the other horrible things.
Dogs and cats.
That signal the apocalypse are happening. The trains are all covered with snow and things like that. And so Nyarlathotep has been portrayed as an electrical showman, I think, because everyone's in love with Will Murray's theory that it's a Nikola Tesla reference. But it could also absolutely be a reference to just going to see a movie and being blown away.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. And it does not explicitly say projector, but it does say thrown upon a screen over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So that does imply, at the very least, we're talking magic lantern slides where people would come back and say, I'm going to show you instructive views of the Holy Land because I was just over there.
You mean porn?
That's for the later show.
Oh, okay.
There's a matinee and then there's a later show. 10-cent seats.
Those average
35
means
cents.
you change your name from the Media to the Empire, or vice
So you're
versa.
saying the 10-cent seats got the newsreel and the 35-cent seats got the porn?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the Bijou, in fact, did show risque movies.
Yeah.
It did not show pornography,
No.
but it did show movies that other theaters in Providence would not touch, which is a sign, as then as now, that the theater is actually losing money because it's trying everything it can to draw in an audience, which is why when it got bought by the new guy and changed to the Empire, they fired all the old people, which is why David Hayden thinks maybe that's why Lovecraft had an in and could get that job as a ticket taker.
So the more you know, the more you go insane.
The more you obsessively research Providence, Rhode Island movie theaters, hat tip to David Hayden, for God's sake.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of y'all for doing this.
Thank you.
This was all kind of thrown together in a kind of a slapdash fashion, and I really appreciate everybody kind of stepping up and showing up. So thank you to Chris, Andrew, Ken, and Scott here. Hands to these guys, huh? I do appreciate this. One of my favorite things to do is to talk about movies, and especially classic films. And I have people that are as passionate about it and know things about it that I don't, and vice versa. It's a real treat. So I do appreciate all of you being here. And I appreciate all of you coming here to this as well. This was kind of the panel idea that I pitched to Gwen. I didn't know if it would fly. I had a good time chatting, so I think it flew. But I hope you enjoyed it too.
And absolutely, anyone watching here or on the internet or wherever, if you're not listening to Derek's podcast, Monster Kid Radio, listen to Derek's podcast, Monster Kid Radio. Not just the two so far that he's had me on for, but all the episodes.
Have you only done two?
I've only done two, Derek, and yes, I do feel that.
You know, I don't think I've had Scott on proper at all, or Andrew really. I mean, I might have interviewed you once.
You know what? I don't really care about Scott or Andrew.
He really doesn't.
Okay. I'll make it official in front of all these people. You all have an open invitation to come on the show proper, pick a movie, pick a time.
But seriously, it's an amazing ride. Derek usually spends longer than the movie is talking about it.
True.
Real deep dive, real drill down. You know, movies that you just dismissed as a thing to watch, you know, when you're high. Suddenly, there's levels and layers. Even movies that objectively are kind of terrible, they've still got a meaning and a place in the art form and the history of the genre. And Derek is better positioned than 99% of people who talk movies.
I immediately did a Mask of Fu Manchu with Boris Karloff.
I don't think I've talked about that yet.
Thank goodness.
Let's make it happen.
All right.
All right,
Thank
guys.
you, everyone.
Thank you for being here. Y'all are awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate everybody's support of the podcast over the years. We've been going for quite some time, 593 episodes as of this recording. That does not include the few specials that we did over the years. We haven't done one of those in a while, but if I go and added it up, I don't know. I would love to know how many hours of Monster Kid Radio there are out there. So if there's anybody out there that's really, really bored and wants to spend some intimate time with their calculator, I'd be real curious to know how many hours of Monster Kid Radio and related content exists out in the world. You know, there's a lot going on in my personal life right now. I'm working 2 jobs. I've mentioned this repeatedly. Trying to find a third job or a replacement job. I don't know. I'm interviewing. If anybody knows of any good work from home jobs, you know, I'm all ears, man. I would love to make a little bit more money than I'm making now, and yeah. Anyway, I'm busy is what I'm getting at. There's a lot of changes happening. I've had a lot of changes happen to me over the years on Monster Kid Radio. You know, the divorce, the moving from Beaverton, Oregon to Vancouver, Washington, finding an incredible relationship with Beth. Just all sorts of things have happened over the years. And the one constant has been the monsters, and by extension has been you. So thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you and all of your support. A number of you have reached out to me over the years, just checking in to see how I'm doing. And it means a lot. I don't always respond, but do know that I get all of your messages, and it touches me. It thrills me. I grin every time I hear from somebody because I know that a lot of times with podcasting and YouTubing and internet platforms, social media stuff, it's real easy to form what is sometimes referred to as a parasocial relationship. What does that mean? Basically, a parasocial relationship is a one-sided relationship where one person feels like they have a connection and in a real relationship with somebody else who is probably not even aware of their existence. Happens a lot with YouTubers in particular, but I can see it happening with podcasters and writers and musicians and things like that. I hope that I never give you the impression that I'm not interested in hearing about you and what you're up to. When I was at the Lovecraft Film Festival, I was standing in line outside the theater waiting to go in. I was wearing a mask, so half of my face is already covered. And over the years, I've gone to the Lovecraft Film Festival with a full head of hair. Actually, now that I think about it, is this the first time I've gone to the Lovecraft Film Festival with a shaved head? It might be. It's not the first time I've gone with a beard, but you'd only see half of it because of the mask. Anyway, I'm standing there in line, and I'm wearing the Monster Kid Radio Monster Lobby Card Movie Poster Collage Hawaiian shirt that I have available for sale, which will be available for sale via Etsy probably within the next 2 weeks. I hope. Fingers and tentacles crossed if I can figure out how to make that tech work. Anyway, I'm wearing that shirt, and some dude's behind me, Gregor, by the way, more than just some dude, I suppose, makes a comment about the shirt, and I turn around, and, I say hello, and I thank him, and he's like, Derek? And we ended up talking for a little bit. He remembered seeing me on a panel several years ago called Lovecraft Gets Hammered, where we talked about hammer films that have a Lovecraftian element or influence potentially in them. And honestly, Gregor, if you're listening, forgive me. I don't remember talking with you back then, but I certainly remember talking with you this time around because we ended up talking about hammer films, what some of his favorite hammer films are. He remembered the 1951 Downplace podcast, all because he recognized my voice. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I was really excited to talk to Gregor and hear about what some of his favorite movies are. And Gregor, I cannot disagree with you at all. I cannot agree with you anymore. Dracula AD 72 and Satanic Rites of Dracula do not get enough credit. Oh, so good. There was somebody else there, and forgive me, I didn't get her name, but she engaged with me a couple of times over the festival as well, and we were talking about films and all that. She came to my panel, and we talked after the panel as well. And, that's what I enjoy the most about Monster Kid Radio. Yes, I have met a number of celebrities or celebrities' descendants because of Monster Kid Radio, but the best part of this podcast is connecting with you. So, thank you. You've been a constant in my life, and while I am looking to make some changes in 2023 regarding what happens with the whole Monster Kid Radio thing, and I include the stream in that, the podcast I don't see going anywhere. And that's your fault. It's your fault because I love doing it so much. Will things change? Sure. The podcast has changed from the very beginning. Of course it will. But the podcast isn't going anywhere. And I feel like I wanted to share that with you because I have said in a number of places online, in forums, in person, that we're going to be making some changes to the show. But the podcast is still solid and it's not going anywhere because of you. So thank you. Thank you for giving me this gift. I hope I can give you something back every week with the podcast. I have had a number of people reach out to me to ask me if there's anything special coming up for the podcast because sometime, I don't think it'd be, I'd have to look at the calendar, and math is hard, and I've only had one cup of coffee today. By the end of the year, we'll have hit 600 episodes. I'm not sure where it would land. Let's see. 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I'll do the math later. Episode 600 is coming up, and I have no plans to do anything special, but maybe we should. What should we do for episode 600? I'm open. I'm all ears. Let me hear your suggestions at monsterkidradio@gmail.com or post them over on our Facebook page or Facebook group. Just look up Monster Kid Radio. Or on Twitter. Again, look up Monster Kid Radio. Yes, we have a Monster Kid Radio Reddit and Discord. Not a lot of activity over there, and that's kind of my fault. It's kind of a full-time job that I'm trying to seek in between various jobs to do all the social media stuff. Maybe we need some moderators. Maybe that's part of the expansion and change and evolution of Monster Kid Radio. We need to have somebody who is able to dedicate time to keeping Discord moving and doing something on that platform, or doing something on the Monster Kid Radio Reddit. That would be amazing, in fact. Can I pay you anything to do it? Absolutely not. I'm not able to pay myself to do any of this stuff. But if you are interested in this sort of thing, I would love the assist. Again, you can reach out to me at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call and leave us a voicemail as well. We do have a voicemail number set up at 360-524-2484. I'm still working at the Haunt, still taking tickets at the ticket booth at Scaregrounds PDX. If you are interested in checking out what I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to flat out say it. Scaregrounds PDX is the Pacific Northwest's premier haunted house. I'll say that. I'll say it. Monster Kid Radio definitely approves. And not just because I'm working there, and not just because the woman I love is one of the managers. It is truly an immersive, amazing experience. And if you are interested in going and saving a couple bucks on your ticket, go to tinyurl.com/MKR Scaregrounds. And again, make sure you let them know that you heard about them here on Monster Kid Radio. What's coming up next week on the show? I'm not 100% sure. I really need to just reach out to Steve and schedule that House of Dracula conversation with him. I'd like to have him on the show. And I did firm this up. Andrew Migliore will be on a future episode of Monster Kid Radio in which we talk about the Quatermass films. I'm not sure if we're going to do all three or just Quatermass in the Pit. I just know that he's a huge Quatermass fan. So we're going to talk about one of the Quatermass films. Also, Scott Glancy, we're going to have him on the show. We're going to talk about a Boris Karloff film. A Boris Karloff film that doesn't necessarily have a traditional monster in it, although the yellow face might be considered monstrous. We're going to talk about The Mask of Fu Manchu, starring Boris Karloff with Scott Glancy. So that'll be fun as well. Now, I don't have a topic set up with Ken Hite yet, but there will be a Ken Hite episode coming up in the near future. And it's been way too long since I've had Chris McMillan on the show as well. Also, David Heath, the man whose panel I had to bail on because I had a job interview, will be on the show as well in the future. We're going to talk about something Robert E. Howard related. I've mentioned that I wanted to do more Robert E. Howard content on the podcast. I've had some suggestions that we do it like a beta capsule review segment. I don't know if that's really the answer. I don't know if, well, okay, actually, I take it back. I do know that doing a separate spin-off podcast is not in the cards right now. It just is not feasible unless I were to set up like a Kickstarter or something to help finance the amount of time and energy it would take to do it the way that I want to. I don't see that happening in the future, but there will be some more Robert E. Howard content coming up just because I love me some Robert E. Howard. And, you know, I'm really starting to settle into the idea that it is time. It is really time to focus my writing career, to focus on my writing a little bit more. And whenever I get into that mindset, my brain always goes to Robert E. Howard because the man's work inspires me so much. You know, I have been getting rid of a lot of my Lovecraft books and my Lovecraft ephemera and studies and things like that. I'll never get rid of my Robert E. Howard stuff. I'll always hold on to my Robert E. Howard zines and letters and everything else because just the man's work has influenced me in such a deep and profound way. And I want to include that somehow in Monster Kid Radio or express that in a podcast. We'll see. Also, I mentioned it earlier, I do have my writing YouTube channel up and running now. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be weekly updates regarding my writing progress and journey. Just look up Monster Kid Writer over on YouTube or go to monsterkidwriter.com. That website hasn't been updated in a while, but there is a link to the YouTube channel there. And I think maybe once a month, I'm going to try to start doing some significant updates on that website as well. Of course, big thanks to Scott Morris, who is kind of sort of the, I don't know if I'd call him the webmaster, but he definitely has made it possible for me to have the URL and has kind of guided me a little bit with the WordPress side of things. So huge thanks to Scott, who also needs to be on the show in the near future. And I've got Tracy Morris lined up as well, speaking of Scott's other half. And speaking of Scott and Tracy, and a whole bunch of my other friends, this weekend is Monster Bash. huge shout out to every one of my friends that are out at Monster Bash right now. Have a great time. Have a little extra bit of fun just for me. Just, I don't know, maybe set like 5 minutes aside to get your Derek on, just so that I can live vicariously through you because I can't be there. But only 5 minutes. I don't want you to, miss out for yourself. I'm really thrilled for this year's Monster Bash because Terry Mount from That's Terrific is getting married at Monster Bash. How exciting is that? Congratulations to Terry. Much love to you and your beloved Tom. I wish you nothing but the best and love you guys. I've never even met Tom, but, Terry's a great judge of character. I mean, she likes me for crying out loud, so, What am I saying? I'm saying it's time to wrap up the show. Let's go ahead and wind up by letting you know that Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio, LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio, LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 unported license. Of course, that doesn't apply to the song Banshee Bop. That comes to us courtesy of High Tide Recordings and the Surfragettes. The Surfragettes is an awesome surf band based out of Toronto, Ontario. I love them. I love what they do. I'm a huge fan of what they do, and I am surprised that I haven't played more of them in the past. Check out their new single, Banshee Bop, over at thesurfragettes.bandcamp.com. Also, you can find them on High Tide Recordings. I know they're also on Facebook. Check out this new single for $2 and let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. My name is Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.